Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating and frankly deeply necessary proposed framework for tackling some massive systemic healthcare challenges, focusing specifically on Sarnia Lambden. Right now, communities everywhere are facing these intense, overlapping pressures. We're talking mental health crises, substance use challenges, and chronic homelessness all colliding. And in Sarnia, this intersection has created some severe service fragmentation. What's happening is that hospital emergency departments have basically become the default intake point for non-clinical social crises. But it begs a really big question. What if we've been looking at the solution all wrong?
Okay, let's dive into this. What if stabilization isn't a delay in recovery, but the essential first step? It's a total paradigm-shifting question, right? We so often think of recovery as something that absolutely has to start the second someone walks through a hospital door. But today, we're going to explore why forcing immediate treatment might actually be breaking the system and how our brand new model called Project Reset offers a profoundly different approach.
Here's a quick look at our roadmap for today. We're going on a bit of a micro to macro journey. I'll start with the crisis cycling problem, zoom all the way in on the actual human biology of the stabilization DAP, and then zoom back out to look at the Project Reset model, the design of the physical spaces, the broader community ecosystem, and finally, the phased rollout. All right, part one, the crisis cycling problem, overwhelming the system. To really grasp the solution here, we first have to see how emergency departments are functioning as the default catch-all for non-medical crises. The source material uses a very specific term for this, load shedding. This is essentially a systems-level failure where high-acuity environments, think of your local ER, are just completely overwhelmed by non-clinical stabilization needs. I mean, let's be honest, an ER waiting room is stressful enough when you just have a sprained ankle. Imagine being there in the middle of a severe mental health crisis. Think of the emergency department like a high-pressure pipe. When it gets flooded with social crises it was never architecturally designed to handle, the pressure builds up fast. The system desperately needs a relief valve, because without one, we just end up with this endless revolving door effect. And that brings us to this frankly startling number, 72. Under the current system, we are seeing a massive metric of 72-hour crisis cycling. That means individuals in severe distress are coming in, getting assessed, getting discharged, and then being readmitted to emergency services within just 72 hours. Why? Well, because traditional rapid assessments are failing them. The system is tragically trying to process people way, way too fast. Which leads us to part two, biology of the stabilization gap, the human element. To understand exactly why these rapid assessments fail so often, we have to look directly at the human nervous system. When someone enters the system in a state of crisis, they are facing massive biological barriers to recovery. We are talking about acute sleep deprivation, and actually, here's a not-so-fun fact. Being awake for 24 hours mimics a blood alcohol level of 0.10%. Combine that with high cortisol, keeping the body in a constant state of autonomic arousal, substance-related dysregulation, and severe sensory overload. In this state, a person is in pure fight or fright. Their nervous system is literally screaming at them just to survive. And here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. A person in a fight or flight state is biologically unable to participate in standard treatment planning. This creates a profound systemic mismatch. The system is demanding high-level cognitive engagement, answering complex intake questions, agreeing to treatment plans, navigating referrals, at the exact moment when the body is just in survival mode. When a hospital process ignores this biological reality, the subsequent referral isn't just ignored by the patient, it's essentially rejected by their own dysregulated biology. Let's move to part three, the Project Reset model, a paradigm shift. And this brilliantly illustrates the structural relief valve Sarnia Lambden is exploring to fix this broken continuum of care. The paradigm shift here is huge. The traditional crisis response is all about containment, right? It's assessment-driven, it takes place in highly stimulating, crowded emergency departments, and it inevitably results in that high crisis cycling we talked about. But Project Reset flips the script entirely. It focuses on regulation rather than containment. It's readiness-focused, takes place in low-stimulation pods to drastically reduce sensory input, and ultimately leads to much higher referral success. We're moving from high-speed containment to physiological decompression. The whole model rests on three strategic pillars. Step 1, stabilization before engagement. Step 2, regulation before decision-making. And step 3, readiness before intervention. Do you notice the pattern here? The core thesis of Project Reset is that settling the nervous system is a strict prerequisite for clinical work.
It's not a delay in the process, it is the fundamental foundation that makes the rest of the process even possible.
Now, to manage expectations, the model sets some very clear non-negotiables. It's really important to clarify what this is not. It is not a replacement for acute hospitalization if someone is in immediate medical danger. It's not a long-term housing solution or a shelter. It is absolutely not a forced treatment program. Engagement is 100% voluntary. And finally, it isn't presented as some perfect final answer, but rather as an emerging collaborative framework.
Moving on to part 4, designing for decompression, the physical space. So what does this actually look like in the real world? The physical spaces, which they call stabilization pods, are built with trauma-informed design, so they actually act as clinical tools themselves. The environmental requirements are incredibly specific. They use calming lighting to help reset those circadian rhythms that get disrupted by a crisis. They heavily prioritize noise reduction to minimize auditory triggers. They offer real privacy for emotional decompression, all while maintaining balanced safety monitoring so you ensure autonomy without sacrificing security. Every single one of these design choices is strategically intended to lower cortisol and signal safety to a hyper-aroused nervous system. But, the physical environment is really only half the equation. The human element is just as vital. In the reset model, peer-informed support is a core clinical tool, not just some nice-to-have peripheral feature. By integrating lived experience navigators and recovery mentors, the model creates this vital human bridge. This significantly reduces the power imbalances that are just inherent in traditional clinical hierarchies, which in turn mitigates fear and prevents a vulnerable person from simply fleeing the system.
Part 5. Collaborative Community Ecosystem, Multisectoral Interoperability. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it zooms back out to the macro level. How does this biological stabilization impact the wider civic health network? Well, Project Reset doesn't replace existing services. It acts as a relief valve for all of them by breaking down silos. For hospitals, it actually reduces ER offload times. For crisis teams, it diverts people safely away from the justice system. It inherently embeds Indigenous supports for cultural safety. For community mental health, it delivers participants who are genuinely regulated, massively increasing the success of those referrals. And for housing services, it stabilizes individuals so they can successfully navigate really complex intake assessments. It's a win-win-win across the board. And the glue holding this whole ecosystem together is the recovery readiness assessment. Unlike traditional protocols that force a really high-pressure, immediate intake, this is a phased evaluation governed by the community partners themselves. It determines when an individual's nervous system has stabilized enough to actually engage in decision-making. It ensures that when a person is transitioned to one of those ecosystem partners, they are biologically ready to succeed. Let's look at Part 6, the phased implementation roadmap, proving the concept. Let's move to and see how this builds out in reality. How does a community like Sarnia Lambton actually build this without taking on unmanageable risk? They use a very actionable, iterative strategy. It starts with Phase 1, exploration, simply mapping local constraints and service gaps. Then Phase 2, a small pilot design, where they deploy limited, supervised stabilization pods just to test the environmental tools. And finally, Phase 3 is evaluation, where they analyze real load-shedding data to see exactly how much pressure was taken off the emergency departments. And the evaluation of that pilot will be rigorously tracked against some very specific key performance indicators. They'll track system pressure by looking for decreased repeat ER visits. They'll track service effectiveness through increased successful transitions to long-term care. They'll track patient experience by looking at dignity and safety scores. And crucially, they're going to track crisis cycling, looking for a hard decrease in those 72-hour readmissions we talked about earlier. Proving these metrics generates the exact cost avoidance data required for long-term provincial investment. To bring it all together, the source material anchors on this truly profound insight. Many individuals in crisis are not resistant to recovery, they are simply overwhelmed by it. True health equity requires creating systems that match the pace of a healing human body, rather than forcing a dysregulated body to match the rapid pace of an administrative system. Which leaves us with the core philosophy of Project Reset. Stabilization is not a delay in recovery, it is the essential first step. By prioritizing dignity, rest, and physiological readiness, we can absolutely transform crisis care from reactive containment into proactive healing. So I'll leave you with this thought to mull over. How might your own community's emergency systems completely transform if we treated biological stabilization not as a luxury, but as a fundamental human right? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.